Welcome. On Sunday, we worked our way through the Gospel reading for Lent, the fourth Sunday in Lent, John chapter 9, and we had a whole lot of visiting families with little children. I had great fun, and I hope everyone else did, as we acted this out. So we needed a blind man and at least one friend. We had the parents, we had Jesus and his friends, the disciples, we had neighbours, and we had Pharisees or church leaders. Obviously, children didn't do all these parts. Just some of the areas of the congregation did some of these bits. So Jesus sees a man blind from birth, and there's this very confronting question for parents. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus doesn't even buy into that. It's neither this man nor his parents. This happens so that the works of God can be displayed in him. As long as it's day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night's coming, when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And then there's this fascinating action. It looked great acted out in front. Our Jesus person pretended to spit on the ground, reached down, rubbed that into the dirt, and then had a brief conversation with the blind person to put it on the eyes. Well, it wasn't on their eyes because we had the blind. The child playing that had a blindfold on. Then go wash in the pool of Siloam. So a friend had to lead our blind person off, and they came home seeing, and seeing even better once they got their glasses back. And there's that whole miracle. What would it have been like to see for the first time? And the miracle is that it's not just the eyes that have been fixed, but it's all the brain connections and the brain patterns. And then we have the first of the interactions. Goes back into his neighbourhood where he's grown up, and there's, look, is this the same guy or not? I'm the man. How then were your eyes opened? And this is the first time he tells the story. The man called Jesus, made mud, put on my eyes, I went, washed, I could see. I don't know where this man is now. And then he gets dragged before the Pharisees. So before the religious leaders. And the problem for the Pharisees was that Jesus had done this healing, he'd made mud, and he'd done the healing on a Sabbath. For the Pharisees, their rules were far higher than a healing. So then they do the Inquisition, and the guy repeats his story. And then there's the issue for the Pharisees. Well, is this man from God or not? He can't be from God. He's not keeping the rules of the Sabbath. But then there's a dispute. Well, how could a sinner perform such signs? And they quiz the guy again, and now you can see there's a movement. What do you say about him? He's a prophet. They're still not happy, so they go further and they send for this mature man's parents, who knows how old they are, in their 50s or whatever. Is this your son? Well, he's our son. We know he was born blind, but he can see now. But we don't know anything about that. He's old enough. Ask him yourselves. Why did they say this? Because they were afraid that already the Jewish leaders decided that anyone who said that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. And obviously that was the experience of Jewish people after the resurrection for years and years and years. Become Christian, you're not allowed to worship with your people anymore. So, another round of the Inquisition. Don't tell lies. This man's a sinner. Oh yeah? Well, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. What do you do? And he has to tell his story again. Do you want to be his disciples? And they just get stuck into him. You are this fellow's disciple. We're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. And there's this beautiful, sassy attitude. Now that's remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody's ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And by now they're frothing at the mouth. How dare you lecture us? and he's thrown out of the worshiping community. And Jesus goes and seeks him out. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so I can believe in him. You've seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you. Lord, I believe. And he bows right down and worships him. One of the few times in the Gospels where that happens. And then there's Jesus' final words. For judgment I've come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. And some Pharisees are hearing this, and they say, what, are we blind too? If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim that you can see, your guilt remains. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. What caught your attention in that reading? And various things caught people's attention during our worship time. That very confronting question, who sinned, this man or his parents? The attitude of the Pharisees, the whole humour, but sad humour, of the interactions between the man who can now see and his community and his worshipping leaders. I guess what caught my attention was just the rigidity. We can be pushed when we're refusing to accept something, we just make things worse. When that something comes from God and it's good. Last week we looked at the woman in the well, and we had one of the school leaders take us through, and she had some pretty amazing things to say about the woman at the well in John chapter 4. She said, Jesus' encounters back then and in our lives are unexpected, they're deeply personal and relational. And Jesus comes to us. So he came to the Samaritan woman, will you give me a drink? He comes to the blind man. The blind man doesn't say, Jesus, where are you? Come and heal me. And he sees it all. He saw that woman with her messed up life. You've been married 5 times. The guy you're with now isn't your husband. He sees the blind man and he knows all that's going on for him. But then there's the invitation. Now see who I am. I see you for who you are, and I love you. Now see who I am. For the woman, Jesus invites her to receive living water from him. Drink of me and live. For the blind man, the seeing who Jesus is comes a bit later after all the interactions with the community. And there's transformation. For the woman, she's changed. She's actually unafraid to go into her community because she wouldn't do anything with them. She snuck out at midday to get her water in the heat. She's so changed that she actually goes back and tells everyone, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? And she leaves behind her jar. And last week that was pointed out to us. Every day she's done the hard work of trying to make her life work by herself. And we all do that. But once she's met Jesus, she leaves her water jar and goes back to town. So there's a transformation. She literally left her very precious water jar behind. It wasn't so important anymore. Our beggar left his begging bowl behind. Last week it was pointed out she left a lot more behind than her backpack. She's leaving a whole messed up past life. And all those things that drag us down, make life difficult for us, stop us living life to the full. We're all carrying those burdens. And Jesus comes to us to take them from us. So with the blind man, there's a problem. He's blind. There's the initial healing, and the transformation happens through all the interactions that go on. And that final interaction with Jesus, do you believe in the Son of Man? And that's a difficult word. I've come into this world for judgment. So the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. And there's that whole upside downness of Christ at work. Back then and in our own lives too. So what's the outcome? For the man born blind, he knows Jesus and he's been kicked out of his worshiping community. It doesn't bother him. He's free to trust that God works and works well outside the religious structures. For the Pharisees, it's just made them worse. In fact, It's fixated them even more on things that are good but finally not helpful. Moses versus Jesus. And in fixating on that and their way of controlling things and controlling people and controlling God, they end up further away from life and love and God. What's the outcome for us? Jesus comes to us and always brings us into freedom. Freedom of forgiveness, freedom from guilt and shame, freedom from having to make it all work by myself in my own power. There's the invitation to know Jesus and trust that God's at work outside the structures. And the blind man certainly had some attitude. I don't know if sarcasm's the right word, but it's okay to have some godly attitude sometimes. And what about when we're like the Pharisees? Because we are that as well. We get stuck. And deep down is some fear or some worry that maybe we can't even name or go to. What do we do then? Well, we try to be as honest as we can. And we can be sure that life and events will push us. And God will push us and will show us that that's not working. And then the invitation is to find a new way, to soften up, to just gently lean into that area that we're fearful of, to start to face it. And underneath all this is the journey of Jesus who goes from light into darkness, that light may come to the whole world. He's the Lamb of God who carries the sin of the world. He goes to the cross for us and for our guilt and for all the messed up systems in the world. But he doesn't stay in the grave. Light bursts out on Easter, and that light keeps bursting out even in those most confusing or confronting or upsetting times in our lives. In the words of Psalm 23, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. It's worth celebrating, whether that's with a little bit of alcohol or something refreshingly non-alcohol. Celebrate that God is with us, that invitation to trust, and that journey where God moves us out of fear. May the peace of God be with you. May you learn to see more clearly, and may they keep being healing miracles in your life. Miracles of seeing, miracles of understanding, miracles of being filled with God's love and God's forgiveness.